You must forgive me, I'm being very short, very brief. I'm just pointing out to the dimensions involved in how the justices, Supreme Court justices, the warning they give and the messages they're sending us, or the message they're sending us. I'll come much more focused to what the justice said when I take up this sociological, anthropological dimension. There are two aspects I'll be treating here. One is the question that the justice raises, whether we are progressing towards classless society. If that is the goal, or the rules proposed by UGC, is a regressive move that generates division, hostility, enmity between groups in society. This is a question he seems to have asked. Now, I suddenly realized something, that I'm speaking about classless society. As my old Marxist influence, I'm afraid, even though I have left Marxism, obviously Marxism hasn't left me still. But nevertheless, so the justice asks about caste-less society. So these are sociological, anthropological issues, dimensions it has, so I'll be picking them up now. Now, one thing very striking is that when we talk about Indian caste system, or caste in India, we invariably talk about its antecedents, its ancestry, and the fact that it is very antiquated, an old ancient system. Now, if you know the discussions, debates and disagreements in India, you know there are, very broadly speaking, two parties. There is a party which says that we had something called the Varna system, which was very good, or which is reasonably good, and that it has kind of degenerated into the caste system. You have others, the other camp, which says, no, caste system is not the degeneration, the Varna system itself is the degeneration, and that the so-called caste system is how the Varna system always was. Kind of two very broadly defined polarizing groups in India. Now, I'm not going to settle this issue one way or another in this brief thing, but I want to draw your attention to something which both parties require, which is that, look, the evidence that we have, that we could have, or we can have about these issues, about how old this system is in India, etc., either they're archaeological records or the textual records. Now, both, as far as I know, as far as my research goes, indicate that Varna and the Jati, these two words, come together, occur together, and seem to be coexistent phenomenon. That is, when they speak about Varna Dharma, they also speak about Jati Dharma, Kula Dharma. So, in that sense, and when they speak about Varnas, there are times when Varnas are proposed as later creations coming out of Jatis, Vamshas even. So, in any case, it is very difficult to argue that Jatis came from Varna. Now, does not, of course, mean that the other camp which says Varna is the problem, because I'll come to that very soon. But the point is that we are not very clear what exactly Varnas are. We speak about it, we say they are occupational groups. Now, one thing they are not, are occupational groups, because that is what caste is supposed to be. And that is why the early Indologists, when they wrote about Indian Varna system, they used the word caste for that. That is, they did not differentiate between the Varnas and the Jatis. We say it's wrong because they are two different things, agreed, but then what exactly is the difference then? What makes Varna into a phenomenon which is different from Jati? So, in any case, even that is not so much an issue, because assume that Varna existed, Jati is degenerated, or Varna and Jati, Varna degenerated into, was always the Jati and simply expresses itself today, either of the two. See, the problem is this. So we Indians then not only created absolutely immoral system, we Indians continued and continue to expand, sustain, develop such an immoral system. It could be the case, all Indians, as that famous man said, are all immoral people. It's possible. But you see, here is a problem. Should that be the case, we are the only society in the world, in all of human history, which has always been very consistently, very coherently immoral. Now, of course, you may say there was a Buddha, there was a Gandhi who fought against, or a Basavana who fought against immorality, but you can count them the fingers of two hands. One Kabir Das, one Mirabai Behen, and so on. So there are about, let's say, 50 people out of what? Billions who are immoral. You see, such a massive condemnation of a culture, of a society, of a people over millennia, we need extraordinarily powerful evidence to support it. We don't have it. Nobody has produced it. Nobody can produce it. So, when we make these kind of claims about Varnas and Jatis, it is like saying, you must understand, it's like saying gravitational force doesn't exist in the solar system. You need an incredible amount of evidence to support and sustain the claim. In exactly the same way, if you say Indians created immoral systems, social systems, political systems, ethical systems, sustained it over millennia across such huge geographical spaces, it counters everything we know about human history of the last 60,000 years or more. The evidence you need is massive and enormous. Extraordinary thing is, this extraordinary claim has almost no evidence. Same anecdotal evidences about somebody being denied water, access to the well, doing so-called unclean work, and so on, and of course the famous Sukta, Purusha Sukta from the Rig Veda. You see, whether evidence or not, it is not sufficient. It is extraordinarily thin, it cannot carry the weight that is required it to carry if you want to build social, political, and other economic policies based on this claim. It has no basis to stand upon. It's like wanting to build a satellite to orbit the Earth, but denying every single theory of gravities. Now, you may deny it, but you won't build a satellite. That is what's happening in India. This is one dimension of the Varna Jati controversy. There is another sociological, anthropological dimension, which is this. You see, there's another way of looking at it, a rather simple way, very satisfying to those who find that evidence and arguments must be elegant, simple, and satisfying, which is that jatis are basically something like groups in society, no more than that. In Indian languages, we call them jati. Today in English, we call them social groups. So jatis are social groups in a society. That is to say, an individual who is a social animal is born into a group, and the group is in society, and this individual learns to interact both within the members of the group and interact with other groups. Now, this is a fundamental sociological, anthropological, political fact about all human communities, which are societies. Now, of course, you're born into a group. Like, for example, if you're a New Yorker, you're born in New York. If you are a Venezuelan, you're born into Venezuelan parents. It's birth. So it is birth-based. Exactly what the word says, jati, one who is born from. It does not mean something like birth-based inequality, inequity, and so on. Maybe it's that, maybe it's not that. But the point is, you're born into it. So jati identifies. And this satisfies every single problem we find about understanding so-called caste system. I'll come to that. You're born into a social group. And that is true for all human beings. And we Indians call it jati, born into. Now, when you're born into a group, you learn the practices and the ways of the group. You speak the language of the group, you follow the ways of eating, dressing, and the group itself has adapted the environment you're in. How the group interacts with other groups depends upon the biography and manner of speaking of these groups. In other words, these interactions between jatis vary in regions, within regions, between regions. Which means, if there are social groups, how they relate to each other, how they are organized within society will show extraordinary variation. You can say, what is the principle behind it? You see, it's like asking the question, what is the principle behind Great Britain society, American society? Well, there are color differences, blacks and whites. There are linguistic differences, those who speak Spanish and those who speak, let's say, Tamil. So there are all kinds of differences. To speak as though how the Venezuelans interact with Nicaraguans in the United States and how the Tamilians interact with, let's say, Telugu-speaking people in, let's say, Los Angeles, if you're seeking one principle or a set of principles, it'll be very difficult to find it. Maybe there are, we don't know, but nobody has found it so far. So these kind of extraordinary complexity and variation has to do with the fact that we're talking about social groups and their interaction. Does it mean there is no system? Yeah, there could be a system. Of course it is in some kind of a system. Maybe it's not even a system, we don't know. And the social groups interact in society. So jatis interact in Indian society. We call them jatis, they call them social groups. Then you see the attempt, the idea that you need a caste-less society if castes are social groups, or simply impossible. Human beings are born into groups, you can't abolish groups. You can't have a relationship between an individual not born into a group relating to the state. It cannot happen, it will not happen, it has not happened. So therefore, wanting a caste-less society expresses the same thing we have been coming across, total absolute ignorance. But it is an ignorance which parades as knowledge, because they want they find caste system not desired, it must be abolished. But there is not one single procedure, one single policy, one single program made under the British, after the British, which does not heighten, which does not accentuate the differences. When you have reservation, general category, you're accenting it. When you say OBC, different from scheduled caste, accentuating it. When you make schedules of the Constitution, name different caste groups, accentuating it. So, my question is very simple. Have we ever succeeded in formulating a single program, be it political, social, economic, whatever, which abolishes, destroys jatis? We haven't. Why? Because it is impossible. So when you say you want a casteless society, it's worse than my Marxist predilection earlier on. Classless society is possible to achieve, because social classes, as Marx understood it, were specific creations of certain kinds of societies. It is not a universal, existing, unchangeable forms of human beings living with each other. So they could talk about, which they did not create, it doesn't matter why, classless society. And we cannot give one single example of a policy or a program in India in the last 250 years which has managed to abolish, with respect to that program, castes in a region, in a geographical space, or over the whole of India. So, to want to have a casteless society is like wishing, I only hope we are not born into social groups. Well, it's a good thing to have, I suppose, if you're an American especially, because America says an individual isolated atom faces the state. Well, even they have not achieved it, and they will not achieve it. Nobody can achieve it. So what exactly is it that we want when we say we want a casteless society? What does it mean to aim at it? What does it mean to have it as a goal to reach? What modes and methods are possible to reach it? Everything says this is impossible, which is why nothing has worked. These policies have only accentuated, in the name of equality, in the name of equity, hostility, enmity between people, and it intensifies. You deny groups in order to support groups. That's exactly what the criticism is. You say you want to abolish castes, why then are you creating scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and other backward castes? Why are you doing it? So this self-contradictory move emerges from the rhetoric, which is basically a way of justifying anything you feel like doing, and the resulting extraordinary, unhealthy, damaging consequences upon people, groups, and society. This is the sociological, two aspects of sociological, anthropological dimensions. Now we must understand one additional consequence to the sociological, anthropological dimension, which is, let's assume that there is something called the caste system, something called the system of social groups. Let's assume that for a moment. The question is, how does in any given society such systems are sustained and reproduced? What are the mechanisms? What are the causal roles played by different aspects, different features, different properties within the system to generate, reproduce, and sustain it? Now, I think you will understand it best if I were to use an analogy, because I have called them social groups, which is, does there exist, say in the United States of America, Great Britain, Europe, wherever, let me focus on the United States, is there some kind of an authority or a system that regulates, controls, defines, and reproduces interactions between New Yorkers and red belt people, between Venezuelans and Indians, between within Latin American population in Texas? Is there any system, any principle, any thing that can sustain, reproduce this organization? Now, if you think a little bit about it, you know that there is no such system. Not in the United States, not in the United Kingdom, not in Europe, nowhere in the world. There is no system regulating how individuals within groups and individuals interact amongst each other, between each other, and between groups. But this evidence, which is so obvious, we deny when we come to the caste system. It becomes conspiracy. Conspiracy of the upper caste, conspiracy of the Brahmins. They have reproduced this system. And of course, this conspiracy is based on Hinduism, is based on this ideology, that ideology, and so on. But apart from shlokas like Rigveda's Purusha Sukta, which anyway does not say what people claim, it doesn't matter, I won't go into that now. It does not tell you how the conspiracy is possible. Maybe we have drawn it from the Rigveda. Possible. Let's assume that it is a case. But how does it socially, psychologically manifest itself? What are the mechanisms which reproduce the conspiracy? See, you cannot have a conspiracy if the conspirators cannot communicate with each other, cannot coordinate their actions, cannot guide their actions, and they must also know when the conspiracy is failing. That is to say, they must be able to steer the conspiracy in such a way that it can sustain itself. Even with respect to small conspiracies, like for example a coup will not go on 3 years, right? It's a short period, short place. I mean, the coup doesn't occur all over, let's say, Venezuela or Mexico, no. Occurs in the capital cities. It's about the army moving, it's about doing certain things in certain areas, taking over airfields and so on. In other words, there's coordination required, there is direction required, you have to change routes when it is required, and so on and so forth. So, when we speak of conspiracy, we must be able to identify not only who the conspirators are, they are given, according to many people, Brahmins and the upper caste, and it's unclear who the upper caste is. Mostly it is those who are not the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. That means what? Majority of the people in India, but it doesn't matter. It's not important for our purposes. So, conspirators, and you need a way of coordination, guidance, because this is about over a period of 2,000 years, and there was such a huge geographical expanse, parts of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan of today, India, and so on. If you need it, and there was no highways, there was no internet, so some kind of coordination, some kind of guidance, some kind of a goal. What is a conspiracy about? What is it that conspirators wanted, and so on? Now, simply oppression is not enough, no. What do you get simply from oppressing? I mean, just smashing somebody to bits will not get you anything apart from temporary satisfaction. And upper caste didn't go around, beating every single non-upper caste member in India over 2,000 years. So, What did they want to achieve? What are the mechanisms? We cannot take examples from any society that we know or we can study. Nothing in our sociological, political theories tell us how such a system is possible, how it could work. So, if you simply call it conspiracy, what you need is a very seriously established central system, centralized system, which reproduces this oppression. Now, here's the problem. If it is such a centralized system, which methodically functions, systematically functions, spread over such a huge geographical area, over 2,000 years or more, such a system cannot be conspiracy, because it would be visible to everybody in the world. If that's the case, why is it so difficult to say what the caste system is about? Why is it not a single anthropologist, not a single sociologist, not a single Indologist, not a single Sanskritist? Why have they failed in telling us what the caste system is, how it functions, what are its mechanisms? Every single theory of the caste system has been falsified. What you say in one region doesn't work in another region. What you say in one period doesn't work in another period. Some people say, British created the caste system. Some people say, no, Ayurveda created the caste system. It's all a huge conspiracy, hidden from view, because conspiracy is necessarily hidden from view. But obviously it's able to reproduce itself methodically, systematically, goal-directedly, and enormous collaboration between the conspirators when they have no radios, no televisions, no internet, and no highways to travel around. How did they communicate? Secret spies, I suppose, possible. But then those spies cannot secret anymore. If they travel all over carrying messages, you see, it's a bit difficult to speak of. So, conspiracy, if you use it, that's how it's used, Brahmin conspiracy, upper caste conspiracy, it undercuts itself. That's the problem. So, the issue is not whether there is a caste system and so on. So, asking these questions, if you understand the social groups, you find you're attempting the impossible. If on top of it you want to make it a conspiracy, hidden, well, you undercut yourself. Now, here is the problem. People can undercut themselves. There's no problem. I mean, I'm a human being, but I'm also a poached egg. Yeah, you can say that. No problem about that. You can even take out demonstrations on that. No problem. So, in that sense, you can say caste system exists and it is a conspiracy. Fine. But the problem begins in being that into social, political, economic policies and programs, and educational ones. And that brings me to the education system.